Welcome to the tutorial on working with the new parametric EQ plugin. In this tutorial we're going to take a brief look at using this great new effect and also discuss some general EQ tips as well as talk about sonographic monitoring. To begin, I just want to quickly explain the difference between a parametric, paragraphic, and a graphic EQ. A graphic EQ is the type of EQ that you can see the changes being made on. An example would be like a hardware EQ that has sliders. These sliders can visually represent the EQ curve. Parametric EQ is an EQ that usually just has knobs that you turn to affect the sound. These don't usually give us any kind of a visual feedback. So a paragraphic EQ is really a hybrid of both and is available really only through the advent of computers using software. Now in truth, the new parametric EQ really isn't parametric at all. It's actually a paragraphic EQ because it gives us the visual aid of a graphic EQ with the controls of a parametric. Now I don't have too much to cover as far as the actual plugin is concerned because it's fairly straightforward. It's another EQ. But the cool thing about it is that it offers us a sonographic display in real time that assists us in visually deciding where to go with our EQing. So we'll take a look at that and cover some general EQ tips. To start off with, I've loaded an instance of the Citrus plugin and just laid out some notes, and I have the tempo at 130. I've also went ahead and added the parametric EQ2 plugin on channel 1. Now, one of the most common uses for EQ is to create like a sweeping filter effect. Really, that's all a filter is. It just filters out different frequencies, only allowing certain ones through. To do this, all we need to do is create a low-pass filter. Go ahead and bring up the EQ here. On band number 1, we'll just create a low-pass filter, so we'll go up here to where we can select our filter type, and we'll just change that to low-pass. I also want to go ahead and change the order to 4 right here, and we'll do a slight bit of Q. Let's see, put it down to maybe about 30. And this way, as we drag across, once we get up here to these higher frequencies, they'll pick up as well. So I'm just going to play this example, and as I do, I'm going to drag this first token across the screen back and forth, and you'll hear how it creates that sweeping type of effect. This is a common effect used for many applications, sometimes very apparent and other times it's just barely noticeable. Also keep in mind that the speed with which you drag across is important to the sound. If you're creating a breakdown or a build-up, it's important to flow with the mood of the song, so keep that in mind if you're going to be using automation or if you're going to try to do it manually. Now something else I wanted to point out was cutting and boosting and where and why you should do either one. Like I said, the coolest part about this EQ is the sonograph type display. This shows us precisely what frequencies are being affected and how much. Now there are two ways to go about this. Of course, the number one thing that I want to get across to you is to use your ears as well as your eyes, but use your ears and listen to the sound. Don't just base your decisions off of what you see on the screen, because that's more than likely going to lead you astray. But you could either highlight the frequencies that are the strongest to bring out the elements in the song that are most prominent, or you could accentuate the sounds that are not the strongest, therefore rounding out the sound. But when doing this, I would follow a few simple rules. First, whenever you're working with EQ, a cut is generally better than a boost. When you boost a frequency, you're actually raising the volume and changing the balance. Most of the time, EQ issues are cleared up much more easily by cutting rather than boosting. So when you're working with the parametric EQ2, you could simply make a cut on the frequencies that are not prominent, therefore making the heavier frequencies more pronounced. The key is to remember that if you're going to try to highlight the frequencies that are already lit up and are coming across very strong, I would say the best way to do it would be not to boost those frequencies, but to just do a cut on all the other frequencies. Since they're already, coming across as louder, then you don't need to boost anything. And then if you're going to do it the other way, I would just maybe do a small boost in the areas that are not lit up as well. And that way you can kind of get more of an even sound all the way across. Now I also want to go ahead and bring in the Spectroman plugin. Basically, I just want to show you how the Spectroman spectrometer as well as the parametric EQ work in conjunction. I'm going to go ahead and raise the amp and the scale all the way up so that way you can see what's going on. I'm just going to go and play this back, and you'll notice that the same areas that are lit up here on the EQ are going to be the same ones lit up here on the spectrometer. So you can see that you get the same benefits of spectral analysis from both plugins. It's a good idea to have an instance of the Spectroman running when mixing so that you can have a visual representation along with an audible one of where maybe some problem areas might lie. And again, this is what I was talking about, using your ears as well as your eyes. Don't rely on just your eyes, because it's not necessarily going to tell you anything. If something sounds bad, it sounds bad. And then finally, I want to make this point about EQ. EQ is not always necessary. In cases where you're using samples or virtual synths, most of the stuff is already set up to sound great or has already been EQ'd in the case of samples. So this means that you don't have to go through and EQ every piece in a song. I've seen people open FL Studio projects and they have an EQ on everything, and then they have an EQ on the master. And not only does this destroy your computer's processing power, but it can also create some serious clashes between instruments. If you got an EQ on everything and you've got 15 tracks going, now you have to keep up with 15 different EQs and make changes. The problem is that when you change one, you're going to affect something else, and pretty soon you'll be running all over trying to correct the problem that was just created by trying to correct another problem. The purpose of EQ is to create a balance between objects in a track. It can't fix everything, so if you have a bad sample, EQ isn't always going to be able to rescue it. When EQing, you want to listen to all the elements in the song. For this example, we're just talking about EQ on a single instrument, but I would suggest waiting until you have all the elements in a song arranged and then EQ when you get to the mixing stage. Because you might get an element sounding great on its own, and then it sounds like garbage when it's combined with other elements, and then you're just wasting your time. We'll cover a little bit more about EQ as it relates to, mixing in the mixing tutorial, as it relates to a full track. But again, I want to stress the importance of not overdoing it with an EQ. Just because you have a lot of gain to play with doesn't mean you have to use it. With EQ, generally, less is more. Small, subtle changes are going to be better than large, glaring curves. Take your time with EQ and make changes as you go along. And a lot of what I'm saying, again, can be applied to EQ in general, not just this plugin. And again, we'll cover some more of this stuff about EQ in the mixing tutorial. But that's about it for this plugin. I hope that I was able to provide some information on using EQ as well as the new parametric EQ plugin. So remember to have fun and take your time. And again, let your ears and eyes work together to get the best sound, and I'll see you next time.